Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Finance, Audit and Risk Committee meeting. And are we ready to go, Jodie? Sorry? Oh. Right. And we're streaming? Yes. Yes, good. Right. Okay. So, first item on the agenda, we've got a number of apologies. We've got Member Brian, Councillor Victoria, Councillor David, and we've got Ross on Zoom, have we? Right. So can I have a mover for those apologies? I think Mayor Burney was first. Seconded by Councillor Todd. All those in favour, please say aye. Public participation. I'm not aware of any items of public participation. Late items. There are no late items. Declarations of interest. I don't think there's any decisions that need to be made. Therefore, I don't believe there's any conflicts of interest that need to be declared. Confirmation of the minutes held 23rd of February. Councillor Christine's moving, seconded Councillor Sam. Any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye, those against carried. First item on the agenda, 6.1, page 7, the 8th month financial report. CFO, thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I think the key item that I wanted to mention in relation to this report is around the operating deficit. So on page 10 of the report, noting that from a forecast perspective, we're currently forecasting an operating deficit of around 180,000. But it's important to note in there, if you look at the district plan spending, is that we did make a decision to bring forward some additional district plan spending that had been budgeted in future years, and during our planning rounds we generally fund that through borrowing. So if we look at that from an overall perspective, we're actually doing okay in terms of an overall operating position at this stage. So happy to take any questions.
Yeah, pretty much for the general public. We're way back on our development contribution intake from what we were assuming. So can you just explain how you can see that panning out over the next few years, whether you think it's going to be a lag, how we're going to catch up with that, please?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So with the development contributions, really in terms of the long-term plan, we were a bit aspirational in terms of the assumptions. Because we implemented the policy as of 1 July, then effectively from 1 July, any new lots that are coming in the door, resource consents that are coming in the door that are approved, are assessed at that stage against the policy. But because it can take up to 4 or 5 years for those lots to get to a 224 title stage, that's effectively when the invoice happens. So we want this, while we have, I think it's, we've got almost 800,000 or close to 850 that have been 850,000 that's been assessed this year in terms of development contributions. When they will actually eventuate into a title and an invoice and then cash in the door will be a few years' time. So what we're doing at the moment is we're looking at all the applications and assessing and putting a bit of analysis together about when we expect the cash flow of those development contributions to come in the door, and we would look to revise that for the annual plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, further to that on the same issue, look, there's always talk of the negative effects on growth of bringing in that policy. I wonder if that is having an effect. People who are not wanting to engage, given the contribution is now payable. And further to that is that obviously the assumptions have been made, and there's $2.7 million earmarked for this year, of which currently we've received 0. how does that affect our funding? How does that affect our works program that this development contribution monies was supposed to come in to actually fund or do the job? And we're obviously quite out of sync with reality in our forecasting. And is that going to force a change in what we physically do out there? I know you're saying you've got 800,000 earmarked to come in, but that's provided that those developments even go ahead. What does it mean for us as governors here, what do we do about this? And maybe this is a question for the chair, as to what do we do about this as far as impacting on our books, on our funding, and on our work program? Because we cannot sit here and see that this year the 2.7 million hasn't come in. In fact, we've got nothing. And what's that going to look like in the preceding months? And what adjustments do we have to make to take note of that? Because we can't just sit here and ignore it.
May I just add one other point to that? It's tricky in the first 3 years with the implementation happening. We made a wrong assumption in terms of effectively assuming that we assumed there would be 350 roughly new lots per year in terms of a growth assumption. When we set our long-term plan and the assumptions, that's what we assumed the level of household growth or new lots coming in the door would be. Looking at the team's assumptions from over the last couple of days, we actually have had 380 lots approved for 224 this year. So in terms of the lots that have previously been approved for subdivision or for resource consent applications and what's coming in the door from previous approvals is in line with the numbers we expect, but the timing of the ones that are in terms of the development that are going to receive development contributions is not the cash flow for that we haven't got right. So the ones we're getting in the number of new lots we're getting in the door are in line with our assumptions, but not in terms of the development contributions revenue. That's more, it's got a bit of a lag to it. Brent or David, did you want to add anything extra to that?
Can I ask a supplementary question to Councillor Bishop's question? Just the way I understand development contributions is basically it's a recovery of either it's for CapEx, so we've got to either spend the money or have spent the money, and generally we have, therefore, as part of your revenue and financing policy, you have borrowed for that expenditure. Is that a reasonable assumption?
We are borrowing.
We are borrowing for it. So, therefore, what we're doing is because we haven't got the income yet, it's a timing issue, that our debt will actually be at the end of the year. Had all things been equal, had we done all the capital works, we'd done everything else, our debt in theory would be $2.7 million higher as a result of not getting those contributions in. However, if we had a finite period, and councils go for, at the moment, for infinitely, right, that's the assumption, right, it's assumption, right, and the assumption will be wrong, but the issue is, so you're expecting to spend this amount of money and get that money in over a specific period of time. You borrow for the timing difference. So in theory, if you've actually received those number of lots and those lots then reach 224 sometime in the future, you'll eventually get that money in to repay the debt. So it's my understanding, it's a timing of debt. And have you got, the question I would have is, do you currently have the capacity in the debt pool to be able to fund that deficit for the next 2 or 3 years accumulative until those contributions actually start coming in? Was that sort of in that direction you were going, Councillor Wayne?
Yes, that was part of the question, because on our budget line, that funds from DCs is coming in as cash.
Yes.
But it's not coming in at all.
Right.
So what my major question is, what are we going to do about the assumptions that we've made and the adjustments that we need to make to our books? Because I don't think it's right just to purely next year or at the end of plan round is just to continue on with our assumptions knowing that they are so far out. And I think that's what I'm signalling, is we need to have a complete rework of that forecast assumption, and then actually show that as a incurred debt along the next period until we think that cash is going to arrive and then clear, because it's going to be a 3 or 4 year lag, which will have a material difference to our books.
Yeah, that's a very good question. That is exactly what we're doing right now. So in terms of when we're forecasting the cash flow for this year in terms of borrowings that we need to take out, we've brought that right back to look, and we're doing the analysis of all the new lots that are expected to come on stream and the assessment of how long those lots take to eventuate into 224, so that we then can revise the cash flow as part of the annual plan to be more realistic in terms of when we're going to see that cash. So absolutely that will be coming to you. Yeah.
Can I just head on to that comment? I know of a couple of councils that do have either financial or development contributions where they're actually borrowing ahead. They actually keep a notional financial or development contribution debt figure. So they actually monitor that as the income fluctuates over time. Because during, obviously, your growth projections are linear, so you assume that you will get 350 lots for the next 10 years, just for argument's sake. But we know that development isn't linear. It goes in cycles. So in some years you're going to have more, in some years you're going to have less. And so that actually balancing that from a cash flow perspective. So we're sort of talking around it without actually coming to any specifics.
But I think to try and help with the accuracy of the assumptions, I think it would be a very worthwhile exercise to make contact with those larger, influential developments that have got some bigger numbers in them, to check in with the guys who are actually doing the development to say, what is your timing? Because, as we remember from last time we put the policy in, a lot were applied for and a whole lot didn't actually get over the line or ever eventuate. So.
Just on page 16, the Foxton Futures project was part funded by us and central government. Just under the year to date versus the budget, and then you go over to the change column. I couldn't find the notes to explain that. Could you please?
I may need someone else to jump in if I've not got it all, but from my understanding is the toilets that are being built up in Foxton are part of that overall project, and that is to complete that part of it, which we committed to as part of the project. And what I understand is there's some funding in future years that was earmarked that will be that will offset that extra spend on those toilets.
Any other questions, comments on the financials? Just clarification on page 19, recovery of the O2NL consultancy service appears unbudgeted revenue under the reserves activity. Is there a matching offset against that? Have you been able to identify that? Or
I've been in meetings ever since I last you asked that question, so unfortunately not yet. Sorry, okay, I will get to it.
Any other? Okay.
Thank you. Just taking note that last week at the briefing, I think Mr. Jones, you were on a Zoom call with us, so you would have heard some of the commentary around the issues we're having with our CapEx program and how we came to the financial strategy. I don't know whether it's just for the public's interest that we just make note that we are having a work program to try and deal with some of those issues. But I'd like at some point to have some conversation around how we go about the financial strategy. And we weren't able to have your input last week, but I'm sure you would have been with us with the conversation. It would be interesting to get some feedback.
Thank you, Councillor Wayne. I think the issue for me is, we've got some further work to do on that CapEx and what the strategy is going forward. And I think once we have developed that strategy going forward, then I think that's the time to actually bring back and circle back about that conversation about how does this actually impact our financial strategy and what would we potentially want to do differently next time. I think that's probably the approach. Once we've actually got all the answers at the moment, I think we've got some of the answers. We don't have all the answers, and I think there's more work that needs to be done before we can actually safely land in a position going forward. With no questions on the financial statements, can I have a mover for the recommendation on page 7, please? Thank you, Councillor Christine. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Wayne. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Our next item, 6.2, page 25, our committee work program. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll just probably start by saying has been some conversation about some potential items to add to this list and some potential movements around. So one around the delegations policy, a request to bring that forward to the June meeting, and also the draft internal audit work program to be brought forward from August into June. So those are two that have been raised with me over the last day. So quite happy to do that if the table would like to. And also happy to have conversations about any additional items that you wanted to add to it as well.
As the person who raised those with you offline, I'm happy to put to the table that we add those things to the work program, please. If there's support.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that I've noticed that we haven't been receiving recently is the infrastructure development activity updates, and I just wondered whether there was space in our work program to ensure that we did get some either fuller reports that like we used to get, and it's probably some months. And while I don't want to add any workload, and I know the projects committee looks at some of the operational side of things, but I think it's important for both the full council and for the public to ensure that they do get some sort of updates from time to time. It doesn't need to be monthly, but it could be quarterly or bi-monthly or whatever, but I think they are useful.
Thank you for that. I actually concur with that, and I think what would be good if we maybe not to burden both the committee and staff with actually every quarter seeing 14 reports, maybe we could actually, through the chief executive and his team, come back with a reporting cycle that we report sort of monthly, but not every project every month. So we've got a suite of projects. Some might actually only be every 6 months, some might be 3 months, some might be 2 months, some really important ones might actually be monthly. I don't know, but I think that's probably is what I would like to see. So we develop that reporting framework. I know we've only got 3 months left of the year, but I think this would be a useful tool going forward into the new financial year and potentially into the new training, whatever the new council looks like. I think it's just good practice to do that. Councillor Wayne?
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I look forward to that being a stock standard report, because we are here struggling at the moment with our CapEx program. I think if we'd have had a more robust monitoring system in place, it could have only been a help to that whole situation. I know it's another level of work, and I appreciate that. But also, we've around the table made some pretty bold, wishes of our chief executive past, and no doubt into the future that our CapEx program was actually 100% delivered on, as a goal. And I think we can't just have that as a headline that's talked about once every 6 or 12 months. We actually need to live and breathe it, and to have that monitoring on a regular basis can only help.
Thank you. You happy, Councillor Sam, in terms of that delegations? I mean, I think it's appropriate that the new chief executive be involved in detail, not bring it forward to the May meeting, and therefore probably the June meeting is probably appropriate.
I guess it's for the table really. Is there any objection to adding those things to the table?
No. Okay. So going back to the recommendation, maybe 2.1 needs slight amendment. Maybe the committee work program as amended be received. Happy to move that, Councillor Sam. Do it seconded, Councillor Wayne. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, carried. Next item, project steering activity update. Brief report, pages 29 and 30. I think we take the report as read. Are there any questions? No questions? Comments? So therefore, can I have a mover for the recommendation on page 29? Thank you, Councillor Todd. Seconded. Thank you, Councillor Christine. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye is against, carried. Our last item, our health and safety report, item 6.4, page 31. Thank you, Tanya and Ashley. Thank you for the extensive report. Are there any highlights or further information that you'd like to bring, either Ashley or Tanya? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have any other highlights or updates for the report today. Happy to take questions.
Just a comment, if you don't mind, just to thank Tanya for the level of detail in the report. As a governor, it gives you a lot of confidence around, I guess, monitoring and being able to manage this significant risk. So just a thanks.
As Chair, I've got a comment to make, and it's not a criticism of Council at all. It's just a trend that I'm seeing around the country, particularly in threatening behaviour. I wouldn't see any council health and safety report where that is actually not being elevated. So it's not unique to this area. I think it's indicative of what's happening throughout the whole country, and I think it's probably of concern. But there's probably at this stage, apart from keeping our people safe, there's probably not a lot a local authority can really do. And the question I have is, do you see anything potentially further that we could do that we're not doing?
Not really. I think as a community and as a council, you have a good understanding of what's happening in our community. From my point of view, health and safety of our staff, ongoing training to support them to be prepared for any sort of threatening behaviour that comes towards them. So around de-escalation techniques and keeping themselves safe. But apart from that, we just watch for trends and see what is available to support communities and for our staff, most definitely.
And I note that the police did attend one incident, so we've got good support from our police when these events occur? No concerns there? Brilliant, thank you. No other questions or comments? All right, therefore can I have a mover for the recommendation on page 31? Thank you, Councillor Sam. Seconded, Councillor Todd. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. There being no further business, declare the meeting closed.